Greetings, boys and girls. Speak directly into the microphone, they said. Welcome to today's reading of the Five of Cups in the Marseille deck. All aboard the fast moving ghost caboose. Yes, all aboard. It is time to get to the unloved, uncelebrated minor arcana of the Marseille Tarot. What, I hear you screaming from all corners of the world, are the minor arcana? Well, it's great you asked, all of you. It is a part of the collection which receives not so much attention because we've got all of these dazzling major arcana, like the devil. I'm still getting used to this video thing. And the Pope, the counterpart, 5 and 15. 5 and 15, the parallels. Isn't that interesting? The Pope and the devil are sort of in league, aren't they? Opposites, but also providing a balance. A little bit of devil is in the Pope. So, yinning and yanging, let's begin with an exploration of where to start today. I said 5 of Cups, but that's absolutely wrong. I'm doing the 5 of Wands. So we're not doing the 5 of Cups, we're doing the 5 of Wands. Let's start with maybe the number 5. The number 5. What is the number 5? Well, you have 5 digits on your hand. Hopefully, there are many sets of 5. 5 is very important to many people all over the world. But why? Well, let's get straight to it. 5, boys and girls, in the tarot is the step up from stability. If we imagine that the numbers are counted in sets, 10 is the beginning of the next set. So we have 1 to 5 and 6 to 9, sort of representing those two sets, which I very badly explained. What does Jodorowsky have to say in much more eloquently than me about 5? Well, let's get cracking with what he has to say. Where's my bookmark? Okay. Temptation is Jodorowsky's idea of 5. My housemate and good friend Tiago yesterday said 5s represent not just action, but action with intention. And it's really useful to be surrounded by the other numbers here, because 4 being security, 5 springs from a deeper place than, say, the action of 3. The action of 3 is very much a burst of unthinking, radical energy, which isn't bad in itself, but can represent a kind of premature ejaculate kind of approach to doing things, whereas 5 is very much more the result after a plateau, so to speak. I was carving out maybe an image of the leadings into 5, and I was thinking, well, maybe if we start with 1 and we think of a journey, and this might sound completely patronizing, but it might help give a flavor of where the 5 is situated. 5 in chronology is after 4, interestingly. But 1, let's start with 1. What is 1? Let me turn off my camera, I get distracted. 1 is I would say, in terms of a journey, is the desire to get going. It's the initial germ. It's the fetus stage. It's not really manifest yet in the outer world. 2 is the potential leading. It's putting on your beautiful maroon-coloured socks, strapping on those boots, and preparing for action. 3 is bursting out the door, maybe slamming the door in your poor elderly neighbour's face. Maybe it's stumbling down the stairs, or maybe it's gliding gracefully down the stairs. But I doubt it, because the 3 is very much this burgeoning action which is finally made apparent in the world. What is 4? 4 is security, is pillars, foundations. So 4 could be having a bit of a breather at the bus stop, could be pausing in the local pastelaria, of course, the Portuguese pastry shop, could be just a moment of rest before, then much more, you could say, embodied action of 5, meaning kind of considered production. 7 it's like 5, but better in a sense. 7 is much more of a perfect form of action. And there is something very imperfect about 5. It's unbalanced. And it's very much related to the planet, the smallest and the closest to the sun. I suck with astrology, but as far as I understand it, it's Mercury that is very much twinned in with number 5. Why Mercury? Well, Mercury being a small, so-called evergreen planet. Let me turn that down. Mercury and mercurial, this kind of slivery, formless, endlessly, this quicksilver, this constant shift and movement, this speed of thought, this rapidity, this unrest, this difficulty in concentrating. So Mercury as a substance is a huge part of the alchemical traditions. We have Mercury as well, the god, the messenger, always on the move. And often we confuse movement for learning. We can perceive, progression as development, which is not always is. Possibly a silly example, but I remember when I was talking with a friend of mine, Pete, in Leeds, and we were mourning, or I was mourning the death of a band or something. One band disbanded, stopped playing music, stopped making records. And Pete said, yeah, well, the albums were great. And that's very much a British attitude to production, in a sense. Really going off on a tangent here, but look how many seasons there are to The Office in England. There's 2. I think there's 16 episodes. And when The Office gets exported to America, I might be wrong here, 20 seasons? Is that right? I think there's over 200 episodes. You get my point. There's no supersize to the English sitcom approach, or to maybe the bands to not producing quite so much and maybe keeping it a little bit more modest and focused. So how I got there, I'm not quite sure, but we were talking about 5. Let's start with Jodorowsky on the symbolism of 5 in general. And then we'll get on our way to the wands, not cups, as I wrongly put in the description. But before we do so, from my favourite mug from Taiwan, check this out. Yes, Chinese Tesco. Or I should say Taiwanese, but it's in Chinese, you can see. Bricklayers. In the esotericism of the beginning of the 20th century, magic students and numerologists attributed a harmful and tragic effect to the number 5. This is understandable as in the major arcana, the 5th degree is represented by the Pope and the Devil. I would love to make an argument, a claim for the Pope, for the interesting aspects of the Pope, a bit like how boring and miserable and serious judgment looks like to us, as well as justice. The Pope actually has many charming qualities in the tarot, at least. The esotericists in conflict with the Catholic Church therefore confused the 2 cards and viewed the curse 15, the devil, as the shadow of the benediction 5. There he is. I've really prepared today. It is also easy to understand that in a series of 9 numbers, so the 10 is considered a repetition of 1, not almost a culmination. It's kind of a new set. Number 5 is at the middle, as if between 2 worlds. I kind of got that wrong earlier. 1 to 4 is a set, 6 to 9 is a set, or 6 to 10. Forget it, I'm getting all muddled. The number 5 is in the middle, as if between 2 worlds. Hermes, Mercury, constant movement. Before it, the series of 1 to 4 represents material life. After it, the following series of 6 to 9 represents the spiritual life, which is marvelous but filled with uncertainties when viewed from the physical plane. It's always easier to get to grips with this when you visualize the cards. We are living in a world of utter verbal domination. If we learn to view the world as pictures again, the tarot makes much more sense. So we have, instead of little lines scratched into paper, letters and words. We have instead the pictorial idea, the shape, the geometry of mystical knowledge. So we've got the idea of 1 to 4 as the first stage of material progress, perhaps, and the second set, 6 to 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, as a more heavenly approach, more built upon and developed. This also begs the question, of course, is there a hierarchy in the tarot with regards to one card is better than the other? Two things to say here in my badly phrased question. The first thing is I get really worried when people say, I've drawn a bad card, Pascal. I can't emphasize enough how you can't draw a bad card. If you draw the nameless arcanum, in other words, death, it's not necessarily you're going to die. I mean, that's as basic as that. The tarot knows more than you. The tarot has a story beyond your comprehension. We do our best to make sense of the mystery that is sort of shattered and exploded like stained glass by the tarot. So that's the first basic thing. The second thing is, and the more pertinent question is, 1 to 10. Is 10 always better than 1? Well, yes and no. I would say, for example, we want unity. We want a collection of balances in all spheres of our life. So, of course, you need the opposites. So sometimes it might be good to have a low card. It might be good to have an inversion. It might be good to be elbowed on your way to progress, however difficult that lesson might be at the time. So, but ultimately there is this ladder to heaven, this approach to God, which the tarot explains. We do sort of want to transcend, we want to go up, and so higher numbers may take that precedence. So I'm going to repeat again. Before it, the series of 1 to 4 represents material life. After it, the following series of 6 to 9 represents the spiritual life, which is marvellous but filled with uncertainties when viewed from the physical plane. So there's this lack of translation between the physical and the etheric or spiritual worlds. There's two languages really jar together, and it can be very hard to marry the two, especially when explaining this to earthly beings and the earthly beings to the spiritual beings. Maybe there's just those two lives are rather separate in a certain sense. In reality, the Pope and the Devil are invitations to go farther, to go beyond the limits of the material and the rational. So Jodorowsky constantly warns us of using rational language to try and dig further into the tarot. The Pope, without abandoning his disciples who belong to this world, establishes a bridge, a communication with the other world, the divine or cosmic dimension. The tempter, the devil, offers a descent into darkness and the subconscious to reach the impersonal magma that is the source of all creativity. The Pope is our way of spreading the germ, the seed of our message to people, charity. And the devil could represent the opposite, the sub-real, my word for this kind of what Bataille called base materialism, this lower dirt of life which scratches into our subconscious and tells us the deeper, darker, harder things to hear. Thinking of those, the corner that is turned in the scene in Mulholland Drive, the psychotic man who's seeking counsel in the cafeteria goes around the corner and he sees this homeless man. It causes him to feel a deep sense of shock. We think he's dead. But the idea of exploring those corners which are deeply uncomfortable but are the stuff of life. The devil represents with the alchemical idea perhaps of nigredo, the base material, the dirt, the muck, which is used as the first substance of the alchemical process. The 5 opens the way for self-knowledge or offers brilliant ideas. It suggests the prudence of not abandoning our assets in material life, but invites us to surpass them. So we have the major arcana, the minor arcana, which is represented in the 4 suits. What are those suits? They are, and let me get my bookmark here, cup, so that's romantic love, more or less. Pentacles, which is the body, material, life, money. The sword, which is intellectual energy, ideals, cold. And the wand, which is a bit earthy but more fiery. The wand is described as, well, let me show you the first of the wands. Let's see if I can get those on camera. So the wand is described by Jodorowsky earlier on in the book as making or doing. This is easily confusable with the pentacles, the coins, but let's crack on. The wands, given their shape and given their earthiness, they are forms of staff, you could say, sticks, walking sticks, or even magical wands, batons. They represent sexual or creative energy. Sexual or creative energy. These are the strict hierarchies set up by the tarot. You can maybe make a claim that there's a lot of sex in the intellect, for example, and there's a lot of sex in romantic ideals. So the cups blend with the wands in a certain sense. But this is the strict hierarchy in a sense, and it's helpful to have these barriers, in my opinion. So, sexual and creative energy, the reproductive instinct, fertility, desire, creative energy, imagination, conscious and unconscious production, the possibility of creating, of inventing, vital enthusiasm, power, the healing force, instinct, the vital force. So I like this, the idea of the etheric. I believe that's the language of my school, the Clairvision school. Etheric comes from Steiner, Rudolf Steiner, I believe. Etheric means in Ayurvedic texts, etheric, or the wands, could be considered as prana, or in Chinese medicine, the chi spirit, the chi energy, I should say. The bodily rubbings, the stuff you channel when you're doing Tai Chi or Qigong, and you try to sort of feel around you, this sort of tingling across the skin, very much connected with the skin, with the surfaces of the body, the very stuff of life, wood, grass, earth. But of course, this is much more of a fiery element. The vital force, growth, the vocation of populating the planet and the universe, the overcoming of obstacles through creativity, the element of fire and body. And so it's really great. Jodorowsky locates each of these suits with parts of the body. It's really, really wonderful. The cups being the heart right here. And he believes the wands to be right at the bottom. I would say the pelvic floor, the Muladhara, potentially in Ayurvedic ideas, at the level of the pelvis where the genital organs are located, as well as the hara in Eastern traditions. So in my old Pilates tradition, this would be the pelvic floor potentially, maybe slightly higher, but very much a energy spot lower down. I am, of course, speaking highly symbolically. I don't quite literally mean all of this. It's very much a consideration of using parts of the body to think instead of the head. So the pelvic floor, the lower part of the body, has its own memories, again, speaking symbolically here, not literally, and its own stories to tell. So it might be helpful to think of these as turning points, energy points, turning, spiraling around, weaving a narrative. After all, chakra really means wheel of energy. Good. So, we've done 5 and we've done wands. Why don't we consider, therefore, and I think I've lost my page. No, I haven't. The first of the descriptions of the 5 of wands. The 5 of wands. So the tarot constantly teaches you to never read in isolation anything. This is maybe a pre-enlightenment idea, the idea I don't want to say pre-science, but pre-enlightenment, because in many ways the empirical approach to the tarot is, in a certain restricted sense, quite scientific. You're using experimental processes, experimental meaning experience, your experience. It's a process of deduction and inference. So pre-microscopes, pre-scientific revolution, everything was considered as part of a whole. Things were not anatomized. The Greeks are largely responsible for helping us or pushing us on a bad road of cutting up everything into atoms, whereas, of course, Eastern traditions are much better seeing things as part of a whole, the hub of a wheel, the spokes of a wheel, all connected to the whole, as in the Taoist idea. So, as I mentioned with the journey earlier, and check out the licks of energy, of etheric, bodily, prana, chi, energy, sort of flying from the wand, the primal phallic symbol. How great is that? Have I got them to hand? Maybe another time. Well, there's some terrific comics from all over the world, of course. But you notice in comics when there's arrows and darts coming off people. When you, I don't know, imagine Popeye being told there's no more spinach, and there would be these little dots shooting out of Popeye's head. Now, those dots, those lines don't possibly physically exist, but we all know what the illustrator is doing and means to convey when we see these lines coming out of people to represent surprise and shock. And we get this very, very strongly with the Ace of Wands, the One of Wands, clutched at from the bottom, almost potentially afraid of being lost, right at the bottom, very sort of unsure of itself potentially. But there's number one, germination. Number two is potential. So it's very basic, very primal. We're putting on our clothes to leave the house. We had, flying away from me. Germination energy. Thinking of leaving the house. Preparing to leave the house. Bursting out the door. Number three. That's three, isn't it? Good. And then we're at the bus stop or the pastry shop. Yes, stability. Now, stability is often presented as bad, boring, but there's actually an awful lot of good, a lot of fruit to bear from the stability of 4. It's good to have a stable place in which to continue. Here we go. 5. So we've got this independence in the middle. We've got this standalone element in the middle. And let's maybe have a quick look at 6. 6 is beauty. Perfect beauty. Aesthetic bliss. But we're going to actually come back to 5 and see the hidden ramifications of the 5 of Wands. And before we continue, I'm going to attempt to outline a little bit of numerology, which is quite hard to, really difficult to explain. That a lot of people might consider, well, how on earth are you getting all this from these silly scratches in cards? They're very beautiful, they're very pretty, interesting historically, maybe, but what on earth? What do you mean? How on earth does that mean what it's supposed to mean? Potential or temptation or security or something. So part of me thinks it's completely arbitrary. We've just added ideas to certain images and it could have happened any other way. It's completely contingent historically. A Jungian might say, no, these are real archetypes. These are imprints of God's idea in the human body. Turn off the camera there. That these ideas manage to be co-invented across cultures, that there's so much that's linking spirituality across cultures, that there's something that resonates with humans about calling number 5 potential, temptation or action with insight. Consider, for example, the phoenix. The phoenix, and it's sometimes not worth looking for the original manifestation or display of the phoenix in culture. For example, if we're thinking of that, the idea of a phoenix is quite complex in a way, or it's rather contrived. A bird dies, and then it terribly recounted, but you know what I mean. A bird is reborn in the flames, and it grows to new life. It, of course, a proto-Jesus idea. Jesus himself is not a very original idea in terms of the sacrifice. Dionysus has many resemblances to Jesus, and undoubtedly there are other figures have many ideas of, half divine, half human, sacrificed, born again. But back to Phoenix, this is a big example for me, because it was co-invented, independently springing from different communities across the world. Possibly China's the first instance of it coming up. But how did these ideas just come up in various different cultures? Well, you could say that they didn't. In fact, the memes, so to speak, of the phoenix was sort of transmitted just by people, by the media that existed via people's mouths before print media. It was just narrating tales. We have to remember, the world was really connected. There was globalization before the Portuguese went to India in 1498. Globalization is not just a 20th century thing, let alone a 15th century thing. Globalization, we're always being connected in some very rarefied ways. The strings are rather raggedy, but the Silk Road was a thing, and there were messengers and people on horseback. There was Marathon, isn't it? The Greek runner, transmitting messages, battles, and so on. The Crusades is another one. Migration because of plague. So human memes did spread. So I'm getting myself a little bit tangled up here, but I think you get my point. Good. So that's a little bit of numerology. There was actually quite an important thing I wanted to try to say, and I think I might not really quite get there, but I'll do my best. And it's related to seeing symbols in things that might strike you as completely mad. How can you see all of these ideas in such abstract forms? And I get this reluctance with the minor arcana, why they don't seem to give quite as easily as the major arcana. Things are very much more esoteric or hidden in the minor arcana. Partly this is to do with knowledge through empirical or empiricism, meaning, or knowledge through experimentation, knowledge through personal experience. This isn't something you can read in a book, it's something you've got to do. So let me give you another example. I was having a jam yesterday. I was having a little jam session with my housemate, with wonderful Tiago, and there are some bizarre moments. They're not quite bizarre. They're actually really true, really real. They feel very real, where you're playing the middle finger is on the 10th fret of the 6th string, and the third finger is on the 9th fret of the the 4th string. And if you moved a quarter of an inch to the left side, the story that's being told in those chords changes, and it finds its own narrative. This isn't cognitive, or at least it might be cognitive, it might be expressed through cognition, but it's definitely not something I'm consciously telling myself. And this subtlest shift, the little pluck of the plastic plectrum on the string, might symbolize the something really fixed, really bizarrely, what might appear contrived. So it could represent a group of people moving into a small room. It could represent the feeling of loss in the summer. It's almost what's that word when you see colours and you smell numbers? That's the word. Synesthetic. There you go. It's almost synesthetic, the way that the vibration of a particular string on the fret could represent something very fixed. The smell of the bakery last week during the damp rain. This will all become a bit clearer once I get able to articulate it better. So, I've lost my... Here we go. Okay. I'll just read the last bit again. The 5 opens the way for self-knowledge and offers brilliant ideas. Self-knowledge and brilliant ideas. It suggests the prudence of not abandoning our assets in material life, so not abandoning the 4, resting on the 4, feeling like you're in a web, connected network of people, but also having the courage to jump up and live, be yourself, whilst supported by a community, being that wand in the middle. It's also important to differentiate wands with swords here. And first time you pick up the Marseille deck, it's really confusing. What's the wands and what's the swords? Well, swords just curve round. Wands are straight. And this is, I don't know how much to say about what that really means. What I mean to say is wands are made of earthly materials, so they relate to fire. Swords are manufactured, they are bashed. They are really artificial things that are, of course, very much part of our human bodies, instruments, what we use, knives, we need them. The sharp intellect of a knife, so to speak. So the ones are much more organic feeling, much more collected to the baser part of the human body. And wands are called wands. They can be called batons or batons. It could be called staffs, useful for setting out on a journey. So they have a wide range, like a crook for a shepherd, they have a wide range of uses and implements. So, the 5 of Wands represents 2 temptations, sublimating the sexual force through meditation techniques. So, it's the stability, for example, of the creative and sexual life in 4, then leads on to a new potential, a new purpose, a new experiment. It could all collapse back to 1 or into some unknown, numberless zone. So the idea is at least of development into something else, having prior experience. The 5 of Wands represents 2 temptations, sublimating the sexual force through meditation techniques, and thanks to them, opening the door of spiritual illumination, or else by a more profound exploration of the path of desire that does not neglect investigation of any impulse. Okay, so a profound exploration of the path of desire that does not neglect investigation of any impulse, and brought to mind, of course, Plato's idea of the world as all forms, kind of ideas in the divine image, and Nietzsche turning that around and sublimating the physical, and not quite intoxicating, it's really tempting to say that, but the dizzying reality of physical and material life, which is later picked up by Georges Bataille as base materialism. We don't need to consider the world as cerebral and abstract and airy and cold and metallic like the sword. In fact, we can seek what Richard Rorty called an inverted Platonism of seeking truth through substance. Now that has, of course, its own superb dangers. A profound exploration of the path of desire that does not neglect investigation of any impulse. So you could go wild into drug taking or to any seeking of intensity. I really like this word, intensity. People who always need to be not exactly hitchhiking, but hiking up a mountain, whatever that mountain is, seeking intensity of experience. That could be even in other people, in relationships, getting a kind of thrill, a kick out of pushing one relationship as far as it could go. You can see the dangers of doing this, being way too mercurial, like the planet number 5, Mercury, spinning around the world in, I think it's, is it 80 days? I think it's very quick in any case, quicker than any other planet. And you just eventually lose yourself. You're constantly naive. There are, of course, real benefits to being naive in a sort of developed way, and always being eternally useful and new. What we talked about in the readings with Lester Bangs, the championing of the rock and roll, the ideal of constant self-renovation, the changing of masks that make our personality, the shift of the idea of who we are for constant self-rejuvenation and development. That's the rock and roll ideal. It's a story of beginnings. So the 5 is a very good place to begin because you're stable with the 4, of course. Good old Lester Bangs. This second path, so the second path of using, well, I'll just read it. The second path of using desire as to investigate any impulse. This can be revolutionary as the first, and the first one is opening the door of spiritual illumination through meditation techniques, sublimating sexual forces. So this second path can be as revolutionary as the first, for it is an invitation to abandon old habits that dull the mind. Likewise, in creativity, it is the artist opening to themes that go farther or deeper than personal anecdote. The risk is of electricity and charge and spiraling and the merry-go-round of constant lessons. What's actually hanging all of those insights together? Was there something deeper? Is there the 7 you can lead to? Is there 9 you can lead to? 9 is like a positive crisis. 5 is sort of setting out on this secondary spiritual rebirthing, the second metamorphosis. But is it heading anywhere actually concrete, or will it spiral into perversion or sexual addiction or drug addiction? It's at this point, of course, I've lost my bookmark for the second part of Jodorowsky on the wands. Might read very quickly the 4 of wands to further develop the idea of the 5 of wands. And well, here's the 4, nice and stable, nice and protected. And it appears, oh, here we go. Looking at the difference between these 2 cards. So how am I going to try and do this? 4 of wands. In this card, desire has become reality. The work of the artist enters the world and enjoys success. Sexuality is assured with a stable partner or functional sexual habits. This arcanum symbolizes a person making a living on his creative efforts and a person who has assumed her power. The danger in all domains is falling into a routine, the dullness, the boredom, the dust that collects after too much stability and security. The 4 of wands will then become a card of boredom, monotonous dissatisfaction, in which erotic life is reduced to mere gymnastics. And that's great. Erotic life reduced to mere gymnastics, and artistic creativity to commercial manufacturing. This card can also refer to a dominating attitude, or even a weak person who does not assume authority, who is scared of not being up to the task. So that's the 4 done, and bam! The 1 in the middle, symbolizing vibrant new energy. Where's it heading? Let's read. 5 of wands. The 5 of wands carries a temptation, a new desire, and an energy to go beyond what has been known to this point. This can be initiation into hitherto unknown sexual practices. In the creative domain, evolution towards unsuspected depths and larger dimensions. Unsuspected depths and larger dimensions. This is also the strength of the teacher or saint who is not afraid to use the energy of the wand to heal or bless. So this sexual urge, sexual energy, I should say, could be sublimated for healing, because it is noted that this etheric energy can be used, this bodily energy could be used for therapeutic purposes. Where have I gone? This is also the strength of a teacher or saint who is not afraid to use the energy of the one to heal or bless. In its negative meanings, the Five of Wands concerns perverse sexual practices. A conflict between sexuality and spirituality, creativity that requires drugs or alcohol to express itself, or a desire for evolution that has not been acted upon. Lots to say. Creativity that requires drugs or alcohol to express itself. So something that is hanging on. I think there's a good word in German, abhängig. Nama can help us out there. Meaning you're hanging on to something, meaning you're dependent. Abhängig, I think. Physical dependency on drugs, meaning you need this thing in order to fulfill a creative urge. Which of course is not sustainable. Your body's not built for that. It's not to say you can't use intoxicants for certain purposes, but as the prerequisite for contact with divinity or with intense experience, as we said, not a good idea. Not sustainable. You'll spiral back down the ladder. Curious as well about perversity. I'm sure some of you have watched Jodorowsky's films. Who is he to tell us to not be sexually perverse? I have a feeling perversity relates to the word turning around, turning for something. I have to look that up. But in any case, I think we ought to think about what Jodorowsky means by perversity, bearing in mind El Topo, his film with the most dazzling amount of gratuitous violence mixed in with sublime scenes of a naked son and the father with a big beard and cowboy hat in the desert. Very rich from Jodorowsky to tell us not to be sexually perverse. But what does he actually mean? What might he actually mean by sexual perversity? It could be a kind of parasitical engagement with intimacy. Instead of, it's not a case that maybe that he's saying you're not allowed to enjoy these particular ways of making love. Instead, the perversity could be the selfish accumulation of points, racking up numbers, bodies on your bed, or just seeking the rub of sexual energy rather than the place where it can bring you to. The dreams that you have afterwards. The shared space that is held. So, oh well, I've read that bit. No more Jodorowsky. I think we're finding our ending. So thank you for joining the voyage of the fast-moving ghost caboose. I'm excited for the rest of the readings. I'm hoping you are all staying compos mentis. I hope you're all staying well and vibrant, and that you're not wanting to scratch the eyes out of your other halves or your cats or dogs. This is getting to crunch time, and we've got a lot further to go in this universal meltdown, this peculiar wave of collapse. The wave of collapse that is this corona crisis. But think of what you will regret having not done. If we let this pass, if we're just on Netflix the whole time, respect to Netflix, respect to my PlayStation 3. But there's a huge opportunity now. I'm not at all sweeping aside the immense pain, the suffering, the cry of the universal collective mankind's scream, the voice piercing into a collective consciousness, perhaps. This is something we, in a way, will move on from and look back on. And in certain respects, we will miss what we have now. We will miss this amazing opportunity. So, time to say goodbye. Thank you, folks.